name's Devon Snyder. I'm a rangeland ecologist at UNR. I work in the Rangeland Ecology Lab, and I've been in that position for about, it's coming up on 7 years this September. So I've been pretty buried in this sort of stuff for a long time. And today I'm going to talk about the title's Northern Nevada native plants, but I'm really going to be talking more about why Northern Nevada is such a weird place to try to get native plants for the home garden, and some of the trials and tribulations we face in this effort, and do a little bit of ecology because that's really my wheelhouse, and hopefully we can have a good discussion afterwards about where to go with this sort of topic. It's near and dear to my heart and really complicated, so we'll see what kind of conversation we can have. So I'll get started, and I think I'll try to pay attention to, can I even see the chat? My chat disappeared. So I guess just unmute yourself if you have questions during this. I'm totally fine with it being broken up. Anyway, let's get started. So a little bit more of an introduction of myself. So I'm originally from the Northeast, like born in upstate New York, went to college in Vermont, really grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania near Philadelphia, and then moved to Nevada about a decade ago for what was going to be like a 6-month internship. And it has turned into a whole career of rangeland ecology and public land monitoring and research now. And in the process, I was able to move to Reno, and we bought this little house, my husband and I, and because I have had some access to native plant seed and little plants from like old research projects that were going away and things were getting thrown out, I started putting this stuff in my front yard to make a little rangeland scene at home. So we're in Northwest Reno by the university, and this is a several year progression of our front yard. And I sort of just started doing this because I thought it made sense for me, and I didn't want to irrigate the front yard. And all we had when we moved into the house was the decomposed granite stuff, which I severely regret not getting rid of immediately. So you can talk landscaping materials too, but I just started, I was like, I'm just going to make this little rangeland scene with native grasses and whatever shrubs I can find and whatever native plants I can find. And it's really grown up. It's gotten, kind of weedy. I weed it a little bit. I'm mostly just, basically, if it can survive without irrigation, it can stay in my yard, and I'm okay with that. So about 2 years ago, when this thing started actually looking like a real landscape scene, I started realizing that this is really hard to create for the average person. So if you don't already know a bunch about Nevada native plants, if you don't already know plant-soil relationships and like which plants are going to be able to grow from seed, which ones are going to be able to grow from cuttings, exactly what scientific name plant to look for in a nursery or in a seed mix or online, this is really unattainable for the average person in the Reno area. But some of that information isn't that complicated. So I was trying to think of ways to make that more approachable for people. And I work in education, so like we have access to all this stuff, and there's hardly anyone working on this. Even the Master Gardener program doesn't really touch native plants right now. And so along with my friend Carrie and I, we're trying to start this Wild Gardens of Washoe County thing, which worst timing ever. We were going to really kick it off with a garden tour. Let's see, that was going to be last week, I think, to do like pollinator week in Reno and do a native plant garden tour of like the small handful of native or pollinator themed gardens That basically got put to the side during all the COVID stuff. But hopefully we'll be able to pick it up again. And what the idea behind that is, like, let's start making a community behind the folks who really want to work with the native plant life of this part of the world. There aren't too many people working on it. We have some local resources, but they're few and far between, and the average person can't find it so easily. So we haven't totally given up on that plan. It's just going to take a really different form than it probably would have if we've been able to keep getting together. But anyway, that's me. Now I'm going to move forward to Great Basin ecology and plants. And maybe, there we go. Okay, so this is the overview of what I'm going to go through. I'm going to try to keep it casual, but some of this material is from ecology lectures. So I might skip through some stuff if I find myself feeling boring. But I think this is a good crowd to talk to this stuff about. So we'll see how it goes. So we'll go through some general Great Basin ecology, plant and soil relations, why the Great Basin is such an interesting place to think about plants. What do we mean by native, and why should we care? There's a lot of hype about native plants right now, and like especially in the home garden with pollinators and things like that. And it can be a really complex topic with a lot of marketing currently that we need to understand. I'll talk about opportunities and challenges for low water landscaping briefly, just kind of where are we now and what do we need to do. And then a few plants that I know are available for people to get right now, which I know is what's on everybody's mind, and it's harder than you'd think. Okay. So, Great Basin. Who is everyone from Nevada here? Or like, no? Okay. A little bit. So I know Dash and Lee aren't, but we've been here for a while. So I'm not going to go into great detail here, but basically to place ourselves where we are, the Great Basin is a closed hydrologic region, so that means all of the water drains inward, but we are in the rain shadow of the Sierra, so a lot of the moisture that comes up to the across the Pacific gets hung up on the Sierra Nevada mountains. It dumps a bunch of snow and rain there, and then very little of it is able to make it across the state, and Nevada just happens to be right there in the driest section. We're the driest state in the nation, and because of that aridity, we have really big temperature swings. So 30 to 40 degrees change from morning to mid-afternoon is not unusual, but across the United States that is pretty unusual. And then we have really big seasonal temperature swings. So we all live here. We're really familiar with this climate. It's beautiful. We love it. That's why we live here. But I think understanding that the Northern Nevada is a really unique place as far as the greater United States goes, which means that we have to think about gardening in a very peculiar way. And I'm sure as permaculture folks, people who've tried to grow vegetables here, you know that we have kind of different rules with when to put things in the ground and when to water things. You know, we have to really pay attention to things that if you're growing plants in Pennsylvania, you don't have to worry about a lot of those issues, and you might have a different suite of pests, but we don't have to deal with those like crazy temperature and aridity issues. The other thing about Nevada, Northern Nevada in particular, Central Nevada, is that we have really diverse landforms. So Nevada has the greatest number of named mountain ranges of any state. And we have lots of elevation changes, so that we have diverse geology, soil types, landforms that influence our soil and the plants and the climate So we have microclimates all over the state. And all of these lead to challenges in choosing landscaping plants. So here's a crazy map. So I zoomed in on this. This is a level 4 ecoregion map for the United States. But I just wanted to point out how different Nevada is from California. So here's the outline of Nevada at this funky angle. Here's Carson City. They apparently couldn't fit Reno on the map or any other town in northern Nevada. And basically what this shows are plant community types at a sort of a large scale across the United States. So each one of these labels has a sort of loose description of the plant community and climate that exists there. So we're this 13AA, which is the Sierra Nevada influenced semi-arid hills and basins. So that's like Carson City to Reno. It's this little light pink thing. Pretty small, specific plant community type. And as an ecologist, I have there's a lot of different ways we can classify landscapes, but I think that this map's really telling because you can see just over the hill, we get into California, totally different ecoregion. I wish I had a whiteboard. This whole area of Nevada is a central basin and range, and it's classified together as like a big climate zone that has very little precipitation, mountain ranges with lots of sagebrush. When you get into California, you're in a totally different ecoregion, and then we have these smaller plant communities within it. And if you've driven to San Francisco, you've driven through these, you know that it's really different than what you see if you drive the other direction toward Winnemucca or toward Austin. So we live in a pretty unique place, and I think that's another important thing to recognize when we think about where we're getting plants and where we're buying plants from, thinking of what native really means. I'm going to keep talking about this, but the idea of native is like very specific to a region, and it's usually based on like climate and soil relationship. So here's a typical scene. This is the Toyabe Range in central Nevada. Another thing we deal with here is dramatic elevation gradients. So the plants that grow at the tops of the mountain ranges are very different than what grows on the side slopes. Then as you go down in elevation, you have different plant communities that live at each elevation. So like the favorite plants that were mentioned. So like your lupins, not many of those are going to be in these like bottom salt flat areas, but you will find them up high. And like Lee's bud sagebrush, that is going to live at the base of these mountains where you're approaching the salt flat, but they're not quite, you're in like the salt brush world. So you have these bands of plants that are able to survive in these really specific, usually it's a water relation thing. So as we go up in elevation, we usually get more precipitation. As we go down in elevation, we lose precipitation, but we gain groundwater. So plants like black greasewood like to have their feet wet, they like to have their roots sitting in water. Those are the plants that you'll find down in the salt flat where not many other things can grow. Again, about the Nevada world of extremes. So we have, this is Carson City precipitation chart with high and low average temperature by month. So we're all familiar with this. We get more precipitation in the wintertime, but it's still less than 2 inches per month on average. And then we get very little precipitation this time of year in July, less than half an inch of rain per month, if we get any at all. and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the USDA hardiness zones. So when we think about, I always laugh at that map because Reno is in the same zone as where I'm from in Pennsylvania. We could not be in a more different place if you tried. So Pennsylvania, it rained. Like, my mom's been sending me pictures of thunderstorms every day for the last week. And they get like an inch of rain a day. It's like not abnormal. Same hardiness zone as Reno. That's if you're irrigating all the time, that's fine. If you're not going to irrigate, that's a huge problem. So this is from Columbus, Ohio. So Columbus, Ohio they actually have a restaurant that's like 39 North, which we're familiar with because of the Great Basin beer and some other companies. So 39 North is our latitude. Columbus, Ohio is about the same latitude. Actually kind of a similar graph here, but orders of magnitude wetter. Sorry, I'm trying to move my chart thing. So all of the top graph would fit below the red line on this chart. Did we just lose a bunch of people? Okay, no. So when we think about how much rain we get and the types of plants that our ecosystem can support without a lot of extra input, this is what we're talking about. So some place that gets 9 inches of rain in January versus 1.5 on average is really different. So people in Ohio probably don't have to irrigate their crops, and they can go to any store and buy a plant and pretty much it'll survive without any amount of water to keep it alive. So these are just things to keep in mind with how native plants are advertised to you. So a native plant from Ohio is very different than a native plant from Carson City. Okay. So when we think about native plants here in the Great Basin, I'm going to use these terms, so I wanted to put them up front. So we have grasses, which is same as your lawn. Most of the grasses here in Nevada are bunch grasses, and they look like this. We have forbs, or flowering plants, or broadleaf plants, anything that produces a big showy flower, and it's a different growth form than grasses. Then we move to woody shrubs. Again, they usually don't have showy flowers. However, there are some shrubs that have really beautiful flowers and can be really ornamental. Most shrubs are pretty boring, like this little sagebrush. They don't have really showy flowers. They can be really important pollinator plants, but they're not usually what people plant for gardens, unless you're looking for like big landscaping structural plants. Okay, so I have this picture up here to kind of set the scene for what, this isn't a perfectly intact native landscape, but I don't have too many pictures of really intact native landscapes because that's not where I get to go for work. So this landscape has grasses. So there's Sandberg's bluegrass on the side here, some big forbs. This is Hooker's balsam root in the foreground, really beautiful. And then we have low sagebrush in the back, so Artemisia arbusculate in the background. And then there's a couple different, I think there's lupin in here. This is from north of Gerlach in the Granite Mountains, Granite Range. This is kind of a pretty scene. So as an ecologist, I try my best to think about ecosystems, not only from what they look like on the surface, but what is going on with the soil and what is going on below ground. And usually what that comes down to is what are the root structures of these plants. So really love diagrams like this. They're usually really old. So this illustrates the difference in root structures with a bunch of native species, mostly Western. So we have this little guy, the pea. It's the 5th plant in. That's a tiny Sandberg's bluegrass plant. So Sandberg's bluegrass is a shallow-rooted grass. And because it's really shallow-rooted, it's adapted to fill this niche, so it it has shallow roots, so it can use early spring moisture, and then as that top soil surface dries out, it is done for the year. So that's why if you walk through one of these ecosystems, this grass is basically done doing its thing by mid-May, whereas deeper rooted grasses like blue bunch wheatgrass, yeah, that's what this is. Blue bunch wheatgrass is a really deep-rooted grass. That grass can be green throughout the season. So usually from a rangeland ecology point of view, we're looking at those big grasses as our things to prevent fire, because they stay wet through July. They still have green material on the top, etc. I won't go too deep into that, but we really like big perennial plants. And that's the kind of plant that you would probably want in your home garden too, right? You don't want something that's going to basically be dead after 3 weeks of spring moisture. And then we have our forbs. All of our desert plants are going to have really robust, deep root systems because they have to survive through really dramatic temperature swings, annual variation, drought, wildfire, etc. They have to have survival mechanisms. So a lot of them put a ton of energy into building root systems. And you can think about this when you're planning a native landscape too. So I actually bought a great book that talks about this, that's for like habitat gardens. I'll see if I can dig that out later. But you can think about this in terms of like, I want to create an ecosystem in my front yard, in my backyard. Maybe I own an acre of land and I want to restore it. Think about root structures and the type of function each plant will survive in, because it's not just about when the plant flowers. It's about, okay, are all of my plants little shallow-rooted plants? Like a lawn would be a monoculture of shallow-rooted grass. But if you have big bunch grasses with big deep roots, that's going to provide a lot of organic material over time, increase infiltration, etc. You have your nitrogen fixing forbs that put nitrogen into the ground. It's yada yada. I could go on and on about plant roots. Anyway, keep that in mind. So when you think about Nevada native plants, the big obvious one is big sagebrush. And there are several different types. So when we think about the subspecies, the general rule is that mountain big sagebrush lives in higher elevation, higher precipitation zones. So they get more moisture, it stays cooler in the winter, they're usually more productive. That's mountain big sagebrush. Wyoming big sagebrush is the most drought tolerant plant. And is really common. So Wyoming big sagebrush is all over the Reno area, along with a plant called Lahontan sagebrush, which is a variety of low sagebrush, a little shorter statured, but grows in similar areas. So like you get like 6 to 8 inches of rain per year. That's Wyoming big sagebrush. Basin big likes areas that receive a little bit more moisture. So you'll find basin big sagebrush. These are the ones that turn into like trees in drainages. That's when you know you're in basin big sagebrush world. And these grow in different places based on the climate and soil. So I have a couple pictures to show of different soil types, because I think that often gets forgotten when we talk about gardening, because you are we're pretty used to amending soil to make it the way we like. We add manure, we add compost, but a lot of these native plants don't need any of that if we understand what soil they natively grow in. So here's the mountain big sagebrush world. So we have 12 to 16 inches of precipitation a year. This is usually above 5,500 feet. So you get up into the mountains, like the top of Peavine has mountain big sagebrush. The soils are relatively deep, dark in color, and you grow other shrubs along with it, like serviceberry, snowberry, bitterbrush grows a lot with mountain big sagebrush. And I have ecological sites up here. I'm not going to explain that, but if anybody is curious or is interested in restoration or like how Bureau of Land Management manages rangelands, we can talk about ecological sites later. So mountain big sagebrush has nice, deep, dark soils, higher elevation. Its neighbor is low sagebrush, which you will find on much shallower soils. So it's not uncommon if you're standing in a low sagebrush stand and you dig a soil pit, you might not be able to dig very far because you will hit either a really hard layer of soil or a really heavy clay layer. So if any of you live in close to my neighborhood, like Northwest Reno, and you do a lot of gardening, you know that our soil is really, really, really clayey. Like there's like 4 to 5 inches of a nice soft soil, and then you hit this really intense clay. We are on this clay pan site. So the native plant community for this part of the world would be low sagebrush or lawn sagebrush. I think there was needle grass. Anyway, it would be like this low sagebrush community because that plant can tolerate shallow soils that stay really, really wet in the spring. So because it has heavy clay, and if any of you have like gone running or biking on Peavine after a snowstorm and it's melted and your shoes have like this much clay on the bottom of them, that is the clay pan site. So it's like ecology by running. I don't know. So the plants that are adapted to living here are things like low sagebrush because they can handle really, really dry, intense summers in that clay that dries out and cracks in half because it shrinks and swells. And they can handle a pretty moist spring where the soil is almost saturated after snowmelt. But these ecosystems can support a lot of wildflowers because they have that much spring moisture. So pay attention to that when you walk around the hills around Reno. Is if you're seeing like a lot of short-statured wildflowers, you're probably on a low sagebrush ecosystem, even if the sagebrush is burned off. So I'm going from this and skipping way far into playa world because there's just too many things to talk about. But there are places in Reno that I know have really sodic soils. So when you get into like white, deep soils, you have higher salt content, really high pH, and they might be native black greasewood sites. So things like up by Lemon Valley, there's a lot of this. You can imagine that this is much less amenable to a lot of different plant species than one of these soils. So these have lots of organic material, they get more rain. These soils might be kind of wet because they have groundwater, but they're a very harsh environment for plants. So we have native plants that grow here, but you're gonna have to do a lot of amendments to get much else to grow other than those really salt tolerant species. Okay, so skipping ahead, I'm like way off time here, but there's a couple plants that I think are important to understand. So rabbit brush, there's a couple different species of it, but this is a plant that comes back after fire. It thrives in disturbed areas, so along roadsides. If you see in the fall these kind of bright green plants with bright yellow flowers coming on, that is a rabbit brush. It's either Erica marionoziosa or Chrysothemis spiciflorus are the really common ones. Blooms in the fall. This is everyone's least favorite plant because they have allergies. But I'm a big fan of it because bees love it, and it's one of the few species that we have that actually supports pollinators in the fall. It's a good plant. I like it. Really easy to grow. Really weedy. Four-wing saltbush is native to right here in Reno. I have not tried to grow this plant, so I can't tell you how easy it is. I know it's available at Washoe Nursery, and you can find it at Hidden Valley. If you wanted to do your own little seed collection, you probably could. I don't know how it would go. Maybe Dash can enlighten us. Spiny hopsage is a really good one. Again, not really available commercially, as with most Nevada plants, which I'll talk about. But this is one of my favorites that I would love to have more readily available for people because it gets this beautiful blush of bracts in May, June, and would grow almost everywhere in Reno. And then ephedra, really beautiful plant, green, evergreen, grows almost everywhere. So this is kind of the meat of what I wanted to go with this presentation, because I think that we have a long way to go before we have a really good supply of native plant materials for home gardens in this area. But I think we should all get on the same page for like how to talk about it. So, and I wanted to clear up some definitions because I think, maybe this group is a little bit well-versed in how to talk about plants, but I think the general public really has a hard time. Someone's chatting. Oh, Lee, are you talking about rabbit brush? I agree, very underutilized. So when you talk about native plants, there's been so much hype in the last couple of years. Like the Doug Tallamy books are amazing. We have pollinator societies, Xerces Society. Everyone's pushing native plants and pollinator plants and like planting for monarchs and stuff. And I am all for all of that. But I think what's gotten lost in the discussion is that, at least, and I'm only talking about the United States here, the United States is a giant country with crazy diversity in climates and ecosystems. And a lot of the discussion around native plants is just like, buy native plants. It's easy. You can do it. Do it today. Why aren't you doing it already? And that is so far from where we are yet. So I think as we talk about this, especially in Northern Nevada, where like we're probably decades behind like where California's at, we should get our terms straight, I guess. So, too far. Okay, so native plant, there's a long definition here, but basically it's a plant that evolves here, wasn't brought in from anywhere that we know of as far as like recent recordable history since we started being naturalists and scientists. The key on this slide is the word native should always be used with a geographic qualifier. So native to the Southwest, native to Northern California, native to the Pacific Northwest, etc. You don't see that very often. So So be very wary of when that's missing. And that's why it's really important to be able to look up individual plant species. Especially in my little yellow text, it's relevant because wildflower seed mixes often have they have a wider range of plants, and if it's being marketed as a wildflower seed mix or a pollinator mix, they want the biggest number of people to buy that plant mix, and it might have a really wide range of plants. It might have plants that aren't quite native, or aren't native at all, but they're still wildflowers because they haven't been bred to be really showy. But they know that they'll have success when people plant that mix, and then they'll get a good review on their Amazon reviews, so be really wary of what you buy, because there's a lot of weird stuff out there, and almost none of it is made for Nevada. So wildflower is just a flower of an uncultivated variety that hasn't had a lot of human intervention. So it hasn't had a crossbreeding go on that makes it a varietal in the horticultural sense. So if you yourself are looking for wildflower mixes, or you're helping someone look for wildflowers, and you want them to be more native species, I really recommend just buying single species seed packets where you can know what species you're buying. And if you are buying a seed mix, research. Don't buy it if it doesn't give you a species list, for one. If it does give you a species list, see if you can look up each one of those species, and I'll show you the website to do that on and see where it comes from. It's not necessarily a bad thing if it's not native to Nevada, but if that's what you're trying to plant native plants, try to look for ones that are actually from this part of the world. Okay, now we're in pollinator territory. So I am not a bee scientist. And I, in fact, am barely a plant scientist in terms of understanding plant breeding and stuff like that. But basically, a pollinator is any insect that moves pollen from plant to plant that results in fertilization of the ovary and leads to seed and fruit production. So that's why pollinators are so important, because they help plants reproduce. Whether it's for our horticultural use or growing food, or if it's just in the wild, every plant needs to produce seeds. Well, most plants need to produce seeds. A pollinator plant, which has been like all the rage recently, is any flowering plant that can provide nectar for one or more pollinators. So that's almost every plant that has a flower. So when we talk about pollinator plants, usually it's in the sense of it's a prolific flower producer that attracts a lot of pollinators, or is really important for one pollinator. So they don't have to be native. Like, I know Russian sage is pretty weedy, but it's a really good pollinator plant. Not everybody's favorite, but bees go crazy for it. Butterfly bush, really good for butterflies and bees. Those are not native to North America at all, but one could argue that they're really good for pollinators. So when we talk about pollinators, it's not necessarily native, and we talk about native, it's not necessarily a really key pollinator species. And we talk about pollinator gardens. Usually that's planted with pollinators in mind, so you have like overlapping blooms throughout the season that will support every stage of a bee's or butterfly's life cycle. The thing to know about when planting pollinator gardens for here, I'm going to talk about how difficult it is to find a lot of native plants, but the reason that people make a big deal about native plants for pollinators is that there are native pollinator species like big bumblebees and certain butterflies that evolved with specific species of plants here. And we're like just starting to realize how, at least in the scientific world, we're just starting to realize how important specific species of plants are to specific bumblebees, for example. There's so much we don't know. So the native plant movement is really important for pushing that research forward and starting to understand what's going on, supporting native bee populations in addition to honeybees. And some of our big native plants are more key for the bumblebee populations. Then we talk about low water or xeriscape plants. So I'm sort of the mindset that I don't really want to tell people what to do with their yard, but I do think that saving water is really important here. And there are ways to do it that are really beautiful. I think we're seeing more and more of that. So xeriscape is just little or no irrigation. But what's kind of funny is I think this idea of little irrigation, we still end up with plants that need irrigation at all. Whereas if you use like some of these species, if we can actually get commercially available spiny hop sage or four-winged seed saltbush, things like that, those plants don't want irrigation at all. Once they're in the ground and established, you don't have to think about watering them and they will be happy as a clam here. So that's really why native plants are, and even wildflowers, like they prefer to not get summer water. So that's why native plants are really key in this part of the world. And then if you're thinking about just low water, there are non-native plants that do really well here and aren't weedy, like hens and chicks are native to Asia and Africa, but they do great in rock gardens, etc. There's lots of examples of really good non-native plants that don't really cause any ecological problems. I'm choosing not to talk about any weeds today. So with all that in mind, why don't we just plant all the native plants? Well, let's talk about that. So it's not that simple. When we start talking about using native plants, we're talking about ecology, and ecology is really complicated. And there's so much we don't know already about the Great Basin because it's so vast and underpopulated. Really, we have like 3 universities that work on Great Basin stuff, and their ag departments are underfunded, yada, yada. When we talk about native plants, we're dealing with plants that they haven't been bred for decades to work in a landscape setting. They die suddenly, they compete with each other, they spread like weeds, they're not sterile, so you can't really control where the little babies grow. And then we also have issues with invasive plants. And there's all these things that come into play when we start talking about using native plants in home gardens that make it more complicated and probably unattractive to some folks who aren't adventurous, I guess. But yeah, we're basically like, my thought, the reason I love the idea of bringing native plants into the landscape is because we can expand the ecosystem inward into cities and really potentially totally change our environment that way. We'll see. But Nevada's a really big ecological diverse state. And we have to remember that Nevada is not on the top list for big seed producers. Why is that? We have Reno, which is maybe 500,000 people, Elko, 30,000. Even when you look into the greater Great Basin ecosystem, Salt Lake's on the very edge. They have a pretty good native plant industry starting. But we get into Oregon, still not that many people. So we're not a really big market for really big seed producers to provide for. And we have enough of a problem getting seed for restoration purposes. But beyond that, things to look out for. I wanted to provide an example of this. We'll see if this works. Let's just so like if the average person goes to look for Intermountain native wildflower seed mixes, see if this works. Here we go. So this is what I do when I look for seeds. Now we're getting into overloading the thing here. So High Country Gardens is actually, or this is American Meadows. American Meadows has a lot of seed mixes available, and you can buy like massive amounts. And this is Native West Wildflower Seed Mix. Cool, sounds good. Let's see what species are actually in here. So we have blue columbine, smooth aster, prairie aster, Rocky Mountain bee plant. That's a really popular one. Blah blah blah. Whenever I look at this, you kind of see plants pop up again and again. In these, blue flax is a native plant to Nevada. Rocky Mountain penstemon is a really good one. I wanted to point out that this plant, where is it? Smooth aster is, so Aster laevis, if you actually look that up on USDA plants. Cool. This might not work, but I want to show you guys USDA plants because this website actually shows you where this plant is native to. That's pretty far away from Nevada. So the idea of that commercial seed mixes are going to be really thoughtful is not the case in a lot of cases. So they put plants in here that are going to be successful, grow somewhere. For anyone in the Western United States that plants these seed mixes, they're going to have something that comes up. And then I would just encourage folks to use this website. You can type in any scientific name or common name in here, and it'll bring up a page like this that shows where the plant's from. Sometimes they have a plant guide, more pictures of the plant, other names for it. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is this guy. Oh, all my links are broken, that's why. Anyway, in that, the thing to look out for is native status and then wetland status. So, yeah, just put everything as the same. So in that plants profile, if I do Iris missouriensis, which is in one of these other seed mixes, you see this plant in its native habitat is a wetland plant. Really beautiful, grows in wet meadows, oftentimes in degraded wet meadows, but that's okay. If you see a wetland tab on this website and you click on here and it says FACW or W, that means that it's a wetland species, and they have interpretations of this, but that's something to look out for. So it's not going to live in the xeriscape wildflower thing. This is going to require irrigation for sure in Nevada. So keep an eye out for that kind of thing. There are more and more native plant providers popping up, including one that I found out about this week through the Northern Nevada Gardening Facebook group. This Vital Bee Buds, she's growing pollinator plants for the area, and some of them are native. She has Palmer's penstemon, and I think maybe Rocky Mountain and stuff. There's more and more popping up. There's some really good ones in Bend, Oregon, that at least wholesale. And I've been talking to the woman who runs Great Basin Nursery about maybe doing a plant sale here. I don't know how complicated that would be, but right now our best resources for this area, Nevada Monarch Society is selling milkweed still. Nevada Bugs and Butterflies sometimes has plant sales. Washoe State Tree Nursery, probably many of you are familiar with their program, which primarily they sell to people with a lot of land or to conservation groups that are doing restoration projects. So technically, they're not allowed to sell to people within city limits. However, I have bought plants there, but I think it's only a matter of time before that's not allowed or they need to change the rules. But they have a really good selection of native plants if you can get in there and qualify for it. And they have really limited sales right now too. High Country Gardens does do mail order, and I would just recommend looking for the really low water. They have a really good filter on their website for like very drought tolerant native plants, and then do research to see where those plants live in the state. Plant by plant. So I have done mail order Salvia dorii, someone's favorite plant. I did mail order globe mallow from them, and the plants turned out really beautiful. So that's a good option. As far as seed, our local Comstock seed is a really good one. However, you can't just go buy seed packets from them. You kind of have to order bulk. Which Jenny did, I think, right? Around Earth Day. Awesome. Snake River Seed Co-op, they have a selection of Great Basin native seed. High Country Gardens has some seed. And then if you know what species you're looking for, you can actually find quite a bit of seed sources. So these are a few that have found like globe mallow and arrowleaf balsam root seeds from. So again, the issue is finding native seeds for our ecoregion. So I think right now it's really easy to find plants and seeds from over here that are close, like physically close by, but ecologically really separate from Nevada. So just keep that in mind as you, if you're interested in this and want to help the cause, keep Nevada in mind and realize California is pretty different. I wanted to end on a positive note though. So we have a selection of plants that you can definitely get seed for, and some plants right now. Lewis blue flax is a really good one. Native to Nevada, grows and seeds itself in prolifically, grows easily from seed. Same thing with Palmer's penstemon. This plant, I've seen it 6 to 7 feet tall in the wild. It is crazy. So if it's really happy, it can be a really show-stopping plant and really easy to grow from seed. I say really easy. You still might have to wait 2 years, but in the grand scheme of things, it's easy. Again, rabbit brush, totally underrated. Really good. It will be covered in bees and little butterflies in the fall. And it's pretty showy. I had to weed like 100 of these out of my yard this year, so be warned. Salvia dorii is available for mail order, and I think I bought one once from Moana Nursery. So every once in a while, this pops up in nurseries. Someone must be growing it. That one's findable on the internet for sure. Desert globe mallow, you can definitely find seed of this, and occasionally a plant. And honestly, I really want to encourage people to start asking for these types of plants from local nurseries, because they have the wholesale accounts. All they have to do is ask the wholesalers to grow out native plants. It is doable, and I think there just needs to be more demand for it. So the road ahead, we have a long way to go with getting more native plants here that are actually appropriate for the Great Basin region. I encourage folks to do their own research, and encourage any native plant supplies for the Great Basin. If someone's selling one species of native plant and a bunch of like that new person out of Gardnerville, she's doing a great job. Someday I'm hoping the Wild Garden group, we can do garden tours eventually. Who knows when. And the other thing to keep on your radar is Reno's, they were at least looking at doing a bee-friendly city designation, which I think would bring funding potentially in for pollinator gardens, native plant gardens, things like that, at least on public property, in parks and stuff. And Reno was at least working on that this spring. They had an intern working on it. So there's some good things going on. We have a long way to go and lots to learn for sure. And I'll leave it with that. This is the pollinator garden at UNR in the Fleischmann Ag courtyard, and it was stunning this spring. So this is what your native garden can look like.
I wanted to bring up something. I got an email from James Gatsky with the Walker Basin Conservancy, and he said they're growing a native nursery stock for a local sale.
They are? Okay, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure what was going on with that.
Yeah, they don't have the exact word yet, but they're talking about September.
Okay,
yeah.
Dash.
We shed a little light on that. I work for WBC as well. Yeah, so James is our nursery manager, and we are currently growing our, so we just started up our nursery, and are just starting to get the shrubs that we've grown from seed that we've collected on site into our restoration projects, and just started doing that. And the idea is that in the near future we'll have some of that available to the public as well, and yeah, hopefully bump up our supply of native appropriate plants out here for people.
Yes, that is such good news. I hope it happens soon.
So I have a question. Can it be assumed that places like Comstock Seeds and some of the other places for buying seeds, that these plants were raised without pesticides, so that there isn't fear for the pollinators that are going to be?
Yeah, I would say the great thing about native plants is that they evolved here. So I haven't had any issues with really bad pests on my plants, so I don't think there's any need for herbicides, even in the production side of it, or pesticides. And then a lot of Comstock seeds are wild collected anyway, so they're like out from rangelands or from his own yard. And I know like High Country Gardens, they have a disclaimer that says they don't use neonics and things like that. So I think it's a pretty safe to assume that. Okay, pull this chat up.
And one other idea that, I don't know if this is real or not, but like Desert Research Initiative or Farming Initiative, I don't know if I'm calling it, that they will raise seeds for you. I think like they'll do a flat of it's like 70 to 100 plants, like for $15, that they could maybe do, a few species, and then people could kind of divide them up, and you know what I mean? Like, yeah, investing, because it's like such a low fee, and they have all the equipment and they have the time, and they can, really.
Yeah, I'd be curious to look into that, I guess. I mean, the thing about the native plants, they require a little bit of a different watering schedule than most, than like the food crops that would be grown, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. And that's what I talked to the Great Basin Nursery woman, Andrea, I think is her name, about. And she said that it's kind of funny because she's like growing wholesale plants, things like the penstemons and the eriogonums and things like that. And she was like, either people think they only need to be watered once a week because they are this low water plant, but they're still in a pot, so they don't have that much water to get to, or they water them just like the petunias and then they drown them out. And so there's like this whole new education of these are a really different beast for gardeners and for people who run nurseries.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. I think you did a great job and really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'm, you can only cover so much in
30 minutes.
a short amount of time, but 30 minutes or however long I took. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about. And there's like 40 other species we could talk about too.
I do have a question. Is there any of the ones that you mentioned that could easily be found, like hiking or something? Is there any of them that you could get cuttings from and then grow them that way? Like, do you know of any on top of your head?
Yeah. So, well, supposedly you can relatively easily do cuttings of Salvia dorii. I tried that this spring, and there are still sticks sitting in soil. So there may be a little bit more of a science to that than I think. But so basically, some of the sprouting shrubs, so things like Ephedra, maybe spiny hop sage. I don't think bitterbrush would do it, but definitely Salvia dorii is like when you look up propagation for that plant, it's all about cuttings. And supposedly it's doable. Maybe with a little bit more effort than I did. I just like cut from one plant once, but
Yeah, I always wonder that because like when I go hiking, I'm like, oh, like I recognize some of them a little bit more now. And I'm like, can I just take a cutting of that and hopefully that would work? I haven't really tried it, so I was just curious to see.
Yeah, probably. I would think that for a lot of the wildflowers, like the ones in this picture, I wouldn't think it would work.
Yeah, probably not for
because they're
flowers.
just not adapted. Like the ones it would work for are the ones that can, like if they get knocked over, like cactus, they get knocked over. They are built to sprout roots. And one of the things that I struggle with promoting native plant gardening is collection, because what we don't want is a bunch of people to get really excited about native plants and then start digging up the endangered cactus that's on the hill because they want it in their yard because they're trying to support bees or something. It's like, leave it where it is. We need to work on like having nurseries have commercial production of this, or more seed sources, that kind of thing, and leave the ones that are in the wild the way they are.
Yeah, for sure. I could see that happening.
Yeah, and that's why I'm like, oh, maybe I don't want to go there, but I think we can have both with the right amount of caution. So
yeah. And I think like the list of the nurseries and the seeds sellers, like that's really useful, especially because I think like a lot of people in the group have been trying to find some, and it's really hard, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was like super awesome to
I'll
get
try
that
to
information. Mm-hmm.
I don't know I guess I can post it in the meetup group or on the Facebook page, just the list.
Yeah.
With addresses, because it is really hard to find. Like you can't just go say Nevada native plants and find anything reliable still.
I think that
you really
was
have
really...
to know like what species to look for. So I can and that's probably part of what I want to provide with Wild Gardens. But we can start small, and I can just put the list up with this group.
Yeah, and that website that you would check the species and where it would grow and all that kind of stuff, I thought that was pretty awesome too.
Yeah, that one's really key.
Because a lot of times, like you said, especially we don't know, the species or anything. So I always kind of wonder, like, what was in the mixes, and so that was really useful too.
Yeah, and it's you know, even plant scientific names change. So like that Aster laevis has changed a bunch of times, and it's like now a variety. So I don't even know what plant they really have in their mix anymore. But yeah, this is a good place to look. And there's even stuff about like some of these plant fact sheets. Like I think they have things in the little plant guides about how to propagate things. Yeah, see, like this guy has a plant guide down here, where it'll say like, you know, this is, if you collect the seeds, you have to clean it off, and like there's ethnobotany stuff, and
Yeah, I think Chris had a question about, is it a good time right now to go seed collecting?
Yeah, right now is a good time. And things to keep in mind for that would be like, I like to leave some seeds on the plant. I haven't done a ton of seed collecting, but like the ethical way to do it is like leave a bunch of seeds on the plant, take some, collect from a bunch of different plants versus taking all the seeds off one, and and leave some behind for wildlife because they end up being really important food. But yeah, now through September is a really good time. And then for like rabbit brush, don't worry about conserving rabbit brush seed. They have plenty. But that would be like a November endeavor probably.
I do love rabbit brush, so I'm excited too.
Yeah, it's a good plant.
I think they're so pretty.
Started really producing seed, and this year I pulled a lot of babies out of our yard. But if you just want something to grow, it's a good plant.
Yeah, I think they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll have to get some seeds this November. Good to know.
Yeah, you can probably get some from my yard too if you want to stay local.
I would love to. I think Beth, I don't know if she's on here still. She said, are you going to provide a list of plants and seed companies? And I think you already did that.
Yeah, I can do that. I guess would the easiest way to do that, I don't know if you have an email list.
Do you want to send it to me, and I can create like a graphic for the Facebook group, and then that way it can all be in one. Yeah, and I can create that easily. And then Lee was saying seed collecting trips around Reno starting soon.
Into it. I think Lee left, but
that would be. Is he doing that? Or he's just
maybe he's suggesting that he and I do that. We're like almost neighbors, basically. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think that would be really cool.
Yeah,
like
it would
once
be cool.
we can start getting together. I mean, it's outdoors, so it'd be easy to, social distance and learn how to collect seeds and stuff.
Yeah.
So if we get a few people interested, that would be a cool. Or
small group.
Yeah, a small group. We can probably open it
or
to
spread out group, I guess.
Yeah, spread out group. I think. Yeah. Thank you, Beth. We'll post it on Facebook so you can get that info. Does anyone else have any questions for Devon? You can put it on the chat or unmute yourself.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
What other groups are you involved with that we could keep an ear out for hearing other things? Like you mentioned the wild garden groups, and I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah.
So I'd just love to hear what else.
So if you look up Wild Gardens of Washoe County on Facebook, and I have an Instagram account for it. I'm trying to post things. We were gonna kick it off with a garden tour, so I kind of it died temporarily. But I'm trying to post things there, and certainly if Walker Basin has a plant sale, we will absolutely be advertising for that. And pollinator garden stuff. That's a good one. The other ones are the Nevada Monarch Society, and they have a milkweed sale. I think like right now on their website it says they still have things available for pickup. And then Nevada Bugs and Butterflies is another good one. They really focus on insects, obviously, but they used to have a native plant garden. The founder of that, Kevin Burles, has given really good talks about pollinator plants, and most of them are, in that case, native. He's another big fan of rabbit brush. So that's a good one to follow, especially if you're interested in like native bees and stuff. That's a good one. And I think they're helping to put in some pollinator gardens. I want to say they're helping with that golf course project with Truckee Meadows Park Foundation. They put in a pollinator garden there recently, I think. Yeah. There's also the Nevada Native Plant Society also exists. They don't do a whole lot right now. And now, especially with COVID, like all their meetings are canceled. Their membership is very elderly. So that'll be canceled for a long time, I think. Unfortunately. But they're a wealth of knowledge as far as like the rare species and where to find them and take pictures of beautiful plants. So
yeah, and I put a link of your group.
mm-hmm.
Would I call it a nonprofit, or is it just like a group you guys
the
created?
idea, our plan was to see where it went.
Blog.
But yeah, I mean, I think it could definitely be a nonprofit someday, but for now it was going to be garden tours and just kind of an information base.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I put it on the details on the Facebook event, and we can share it later so everyone knows.
Cool.
Where to find info.
Yeah, I really want to, I was going to like do the whole poster thing and advertise it. Like we really didn't get any momentum before March. And then, I was like, well, there's no real way to advertise and like get people excited to go look at things. So, but we are I've actually worked with the Sierra Club a little bit. Me and Carrie worked with Brian Beffer from the Sierra Club to put together a better pollinator garden map. And that's almost ready for public viewing. So at least we have like sort of a better idea of where like the publicly visible native plant pollinator gardens are around town, including the ones at UNR, which are very accessible, but only if you know like what little back road to take through campus. So those are really good examples and really pretty.
Would you be looking at doing maybe any like virtual type tours too of those ones that exist?
Yes. I did one of the one outside my office at UNR. I was going to do more and then I got busy doing field work, but I would love to do more because I think that that's an easy way to spread the word and show people what's going on. Those gardens still look pretty good. Yeah, I think that'd be great. I would like to do more. I think it should still be like tagged on the Instagram account, the Wild Gardens Instagram. And it's just me walking around with a camera. So, but it'd be cool to do ones like interviewing someone who actually built the garden. Like, I don't know if like you guys down in Yerington or Charlie. I haven't reached out to her in a while, but
yeah, I mean, we could get Charlie has a slideshow on the one she's doing here at the park.
Okay.
Too. She's got a lot of pictures. I think she tried to do at least a drone flight over it too. And
really?
No, we're doing right now is not nearly as established as what's going on at UNR. We're just started it last year, and this is the second year, and this is a tough year to actually get anything done. But
yeah.
Charlie would have some good documentation for the one at the state park, and I'm sure she does for the one at UNR too.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I should reach out to her and get some pictures, because I would love to post it. Because I think there's not really like a catch-all for people trying to do this kind of work, and that's sort of what we were trying to be. I just wish we had been able to like start a community around it instead of like a Facebook page only. But we'll see how it goes.
Cool. Any more questions? Well, we just want to thank you, Devon, so much for doing this. We were so excited. We had been waiting forever. And I think it worked out perfectly like this. And that way you could show us, pictures and all these websites and information. So
yeah, no, this is great, actually.
Yeah, it kind of worked out even better. So,
well, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks you guys for paying attention, and yeah, I'll try to send out some information however we can.
Yeah, I think Jenny will be sending it was recorded, so she'll be posting it if you guys want to share it or like look back on anything that you might have forgotten about or something.
Yeah.
And then Devon's contact info is on the Facebook event page, so if you want to message her or something after this, Devon,
sure.
if you're okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love answering people's questions about plants.
Cool.
And if I don't know the answer, I probably know someone who does. So.
And then hopefully we can have a tour of like native plants and pollinator gardens soon. So.
Yes,
everyone
fingers crossed.
Yes.
Maybe with masks. We'll
see. I think on that note, I think the permaculture group's trying to do the petal tour this year virtually.
Oh, okay.
So,
cool.
It's gonna be we're starting at the end of this month, like doing shoots and stuff, and hopefully have a few videos ready by like September, October, but we'll keep you guys posted on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just for now.
Okay,
and
cool.
Next year we can, do the normal thing, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to see how you guys do that. Yeah, we should stay in touch because maybe we can tie in some virtual pollinator stuff.
That'd be cool.
September would be a much more chill time for me to do stuff than June.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I think we're trying to shoot right now, like once like everyone's gardens are really like, looking awesome and tomatoes are growing and all that. So and then we'll be showing them later because the editing part takes a little while, but yeah, we'll see. We don't even know what it's going to look like, but we're going for it.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, it was nice to see everyone. Jenny, do you have anything else to share?
No, that's it. If anybody has anything that they want to share, we have a new podcast, Northern Nevada Green Living Podcast, and we're trying to make announcements of events or information, so people can start finding it, either on Go Green Locally or on the Facebook pages or, just so that there's more places to find the information. So. Yeah,
Jenny's podcast is awesome. So if you guys like podcasts, check it out. I'll share a link on the Facebook page as well, just in case anyone's
interested. Yeah, I need to listen to it.
Yeah, there's
some time tomorrow.
On your drives to the middle of nowhere.
Yes, exactly. Find out what's going on.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it was nice seeing you all, and if you have any questions, just reach out.